Narrative and tech design discussed the location scattering tool detailed in the CitizenCon 2954 presentation, helping them understand how to theme these generated settlements in a way that feels scalable but specific. This is our first mention of Starchitect in a monthly report. I can confirm it was being worked on last year. I won't confirm how, but this is the first time they've, I think, told us publicly that they are in the midst of working on it. And while it's just narrative, I do think narrative is generally brought in after some design work has been done, because otherwise, what are they narrating? Let me give you guys a looky look at what Starchitect is, though, because this is some pretty crazy technology. This is their explanation for how do we deal with all of these planets being empty. Obviously, it's not just locations, though. It's also AI. So, like, we're going to be walking and going through this whole presentation, and as we do, I'm sure some folks are going to be very tempted to be like, okay, that's cool, love locations, that's great, but what's going to be in it? What about the content inside of it? What are you guys going to put in it? What about all these empty planets with locations, but what about what's going to be in it? How about the stuff that's inside of it? What are you going to put in it? We're going to see all forms of that. You can watch the rest of this presentation if you would like to learn more about that. This is the life part of the presentation, talking about AI and how it changes. Obviously, you guys have also seen that they're trying to add missions, salvage and mining missions and VIP missions to wrecked derelicts and these other locations. So, like, I'm just pre-warning you there.
We can to make sure our planets are physically based and realistic, and our biomes are emergent. But it's time to start populating the verse, because where there's people, there are their lives and the structures they build. So it makes sense that whenever you go and explore these planets, that you find their lives. And what's even more important is that when we make these structures, that they use and they follow the same rules as our biomes, such as the jungles and the swamps. But before we continue, let's first take stock as to where we are now. At the moment in the verse, we have these custom, beautifully made locations, such as Ghost Hollow, we've got our distribution centers, or even just some outposts. And these have all been handcrafted by our designers and artists to hit that benchmark. And they've been working directly on the planet. However, going forward, this doesn't really scale with how we want to go forward with the game. Server meshing is about to arrive, and we're going to have a way higher player count. So those 73 bunkers across Stanton just won't cut it. But in general, it's also pretty barren. There's not much for you to explore and find stuff out there. So there's no exploration.
To be honest,
gameplay.
We saw this. Because they couldn't do instancing last year, when they added the Onyx facilities, for those who don't know, there's only supposed to be one Onyx facility. That's why, like, whenever it gets referenced, they say the Onyx facility. There's not supposed to be 98 Onyx facilities with 98 different Dr. Yorits flying around doing 98 terrible experiments. Or maybe it's one Dr. Yorit flying around doing 98 terrible experiments. He gets around, I don't know. But, like, they showed this last year that a small amount of locations leads to a lot of player friction, but as soon as they create a bunch of locations, suddenly everyone's running the same kind of missions at different places and not seeing each other. So this isn't a crazy idea.
You haven't really put your character to use for the way that you should. So this means we need to go bigger, which means we need to change our workflow. And with any workflow means we need to first establish a new benchmark. So with our new benchmark, we are ensuring quality and improve on our previous work and make it even better. And any location that you'll find needs to have its own unique personality and no repetition. We don't want you to find the same location twice. This also means that this is your exploration and your findings. So when
he said it. It fit lore for there to be multiple of him running around. You're not wrong. That Yorit, man.
You go out there and explore with your Carrack or with your Corsair, is that whatever you find, you can share with your orgs or with your friends. As for that density, if you fly down to the planet, we want you to find something, let's say, every 100 clicks. But also improve the mission experience. So when you stay more on the planet, you're more immersed and you go from location to location. Just keep going. So going forward, we are modularizing all our existing locations and assets. And we're basically making a library of buildings and layouts that we'll be using to no longer work directly on the planet. The neat thing, all these modules and assets can be iterated upon and tested right in the editor for all the designers and artists to ensure fun gameplay and interactive sandbox activity, and also make sure all the mission stuff is there. Basically, we're building a toolkit. So let's look at some of the things that we need to keep in mind as we are making that toolkit. First and foremost, we've got our art style and branding. We've got things like Frontier for our settlements. We've got High Tech for the immersion.
Okay, I gotta step in here. This is actually a really important reference we need to get to. There's a couple important references that he's making here. So first is, if we go back to CitizenCon 2023, we can actually see them already starting this initiative of expanding out their libraries to prepare for this. Going all the way back to, I think it's Living on the Edge. Your boy was talking about the frontier style archetype. So they were talking about all these kind of like location archetypes and stuff back here, if you remember that. Isn't there? It's sharing like social spaces will look different. We'll have mining outposts. You'll have stuff that's meant for refining, all that jazz, right?
To match those categories together to provide that variation.
All of this is kind of the same thing at a smaller scale.
The archetype, and they provide that core gameplay hook and define the main function of a settlement.
So if we go back here, one of the key things he mentions is that these are going to be locations based around keeping players engrossed for longer than just one single contract.
But that's me. Using this expanded library, we've been able to increase the individual location size, because there's less of that obvious repetition between buildings within any single location. And we can't really call some of these large locations outposts anymore. They become something more like settlements and imply a larger and more established community. Now, as a player, it will mean a lot more to explore and do at any single individual location with a localized and personal feeling mission types that might see you moving around a single settlement to complete objectives, or doing short hop missions between clusters of settlements on a single planet.
So we've seen this starting, right? The maintenance missions get applied locally when you get to places. Wicklow is the first testing case where they want to bring in people to actually get a mission physically in a location and then go out and do it. They're going to start doing that at more of these kinds of outposts as well. Maintenance was the first one we saw last year, but deliveries are not far behind. I think combat's probably going to be another one. Things like mining and possibly salvage. I don't know. Like, if there's a salvage yard here, why would they not give you little contracts to salvage wrecked ships that they brought by, right? All of this is, I think, pointing in the same direction of wanting to make sure that players are not traveling long distances between planets for all their stuff, but rather feel they can hang out in one planet and just milk that faction, run through the content that's there, make most use of what's actually happening in their local place so they could spend less time traveling, more time playing, and the game itself feels more like a series of neighborhoods, like a series of different environments where you get actual different experiences rather than the whole game being a place that you're just supposed to fly around all in one day. Here is a little bit of the expansion in that asset library that they're using to build up Pyro and Nyx.
On our library of content to the point where we could make smaller locations like this one, but with a limited amount of variety between each one. And this is what that library of modules looked like at that point. We'd established our main building modules as well as some of our larger buildings and a number of smaller secondary and dressing and standalone modules. But each outpost couldn't be too large without there being some obvious repetition between the modules used. So let's have a look at that library today.
And we've been over this. It still gets repetitive. I do think, though, that part of the reason it gets repetitive is because no locations have their own unique personality still. They all still feel like they don't have a real use in the game because they're not actually doing anything. So I'm very hopeful that this year both the narrative and this Starchitect tool can start to stick their hands in these locations and make them feel actually like they're there for a reason. Doesn't matter if you have 5 locations or 40 locations. If none of them have a name you can remember for any specific need, then might as well have one. The last thing I want to show you guys in regards to this is I want to say it's micro technicalities panel they did. I don't know how to spell that. There we go. So this is where they talk about
recent to
archetypes
achieve.
at an even larger scale. So we went from a single settlement up to this idea of Starchitect and how it would define planets and their styles. And now this is where they ultimately had laid out the full style set for Star Citizen and all the buildings that were going to come from it. So this ultimately is where Starchitect is going to get its guidelines, I think.
And learning lessons from Lowville and Area 18. Okay. So for the new art style, as I said, if you look at Lowville, we wanted something that felt old, not necessarily well maintained. And Area 18, it was a bit more of a dystopian kind of like neon city. So we already knew right at the beginning that New Bab would need something new. And also, like I said, for the narrative, it was.
And we know Microtech. Let's jump forward. This shows us really everything that they're going to go. And just for a quick recap, because we've been over this a lot: utilitarian, colonialism, and high tech. We already see those. This is Pyro and Nyx. This is Arcorp and Hurston. This is Orison and New Babbage. We're also going to see Henoism coming in with Castra, and we'll probably get some super modernism in Terra. I do not know. Streamline also is supposed to be relevant in Terra, actually. You can look at the Terra concept art images, and you can, I think one of those images they had there for Streamline is straight out of Terra. Like this. Or no, this one. Yeah, this is like, if you look at what they say for the Streamline, they say retro rounded corners, and then they show like these like kind of half dome buildings, and then you look at this and it's the exact same thing. So I do think Terra is going to have some Streamline, super modern, probably some utilitarian. The only thing I really don't know where it's going to come from would be meta classicism. I don't know where we'll run into this. Maybe Terra will have some of that. Who knows? Either way, this is the whole understanding of their idea behind locations. It's not just plop a location, do all this. There's supposed to be context to them, and they're supposed to make sense. And all of those rules are being written into this Starchitect program. So I think that's what they've been spending a lot of their time working on. It's just defining what actually drives all this stuff. Now maybe they got to build the art and like make the system that actually plants this stuff. I'm sure this is still a far way away, but I'm glad to see it being worked on. Let's hear more about where they're headed with it. Here, I believe.
That toolkit. First and foremost, we've got our art style and branding. We've got things like Frontier for our settlements. We've got high-tech for the emergency shelters, but also utilitarian, like our bunkers and distribution centers. The richer the data, the richer these locations will be. Secondly, they all have a function. We've got mining for our mining outposts, farming for the farmsteads, or just places where people live. The function of the place will define the way the place looks as well, and its form. And last but not least, the people as well, the faction and their loadouts. We've got lawful people, like the new Citizens for Prosperity in Pyro, unlawful, such as Xenofred, and sometimes not even no one. And the place needs to look a bit, derelict.
Unoccupied clothing.
You'll find different people.
Is that just nude?
So, now that we've made our toolkit, and we've defined all this new stuff, let's start building thousands of locations. Yes, I said thousands.
Yeah. See, this is the part where you're like...
So, to avoid the same issue of working on directly in the planet, I'd like to introduce to you Starchitect.
So, like, Star Paws, you see where they're going there.
What Starchitect allows us to do is directly on a planetary scale scatter all these new libraries and modules and assets and no longer work directly on the planet. And it uses the same logical rule set as our emergent biomes. And it also gives us full control over the data that we set on these locations. So expect locations in places where they make sense. Let's kind of look at all this new Genesis data and all these new libraries and chuck it into Starchitect and see what it gives us.
All right, I'm going to skip ahead here a little bit. So like I was saying, archetypes, building styles, functions, needs. Think about the fact that when you are cargo hauling commodities, you're not going to go to a security outpost. You're going to look for a mining outpost, right? That context should apply for every job you're doing, from looking for a bounty. Where is that bounty? Where should they be hanging out? Should they be hanging out at a backwater bar down on a planet in Pyro, or should they be hanging out at a aid facility in Magda? Like, they need to make sure that they hit the rules. So here are some examples that I think he gives to show how these locations might be formed. Or it's just YouTube loading. Maybe.
Specify what this resource needs to be. But we can also give suggestions where sometimes you'd find it here and sometimes you wouldn't. If the location has refineries, it might want to be near water to refine the resources. Then secondly, we can define what buildings should be there. So obviously we need mining buildings, houses for people to live as well, and even power buildings that we can leverage with the resource network. Starchitect will intelligently figure out where to place these and what needs to be at the location.
In my opinion, if their planet tech can work how they're saying, right? If we get Nix 1 and we go around it and explore it, and the seeds and the plants and the rocks and all that stuff spawns believably how they explained it would, I don't see why this can't happen.
Next up, farms. Its rules, well, temperature. Not every plant can live in every temperature, but the same with soil type. Only certain plants can be in certain grounds. And then we can query the seed map to determine what plants you would find there. What are the harvestables? As for the targets, again, farm buildings, obviously, power buildings, houses, but even animals, such as our beloved quasi-grazers. And last but not least, derelict ships. We've got these all over the place currently. Rules, well, they'd be close to anti-air because I would be shot down. But even in harsh flight conditions, such as mountains or low visibility, you'd probably most commonly find them.
That is such a great excuse for exploration. Derelict ships in places where you can't fly because the anti-air is too powerful, so you have to find ways to get in on the ground. It's like the excuses write themselves, dude.
Targets, well, crash ship parts, of course. Sometimes you'd find the full remains of a javelin, and the other time you might just find the nose of a starfarer laying around. So, let's talk about coherency. Sure, we can scatter all these locations everywhere on the planet, and you'll find them in places they make sense, but we can do better. You don't just want to find an outpost completely on its own, right? We want to make sure it really feels like people have built their lives here. So, let's talk about some missing bits. We want to tell tighter stories, such as the people's lives, but also logical exploration. If I find one thing, I expect to find something similar or something else nearby. We also need more data control. What defines one mining outpost being different from the other ones, aside from the harvestables? And also give the narrative developments. Make sure people build near rivers, on mountains. They build near town halls. They build near distribution centers. So to hit that bit of our benchmark, we make sure that locations are near each other and group them together. The effect it gives is a fully developed landscape with vistas and points of interest all over. And we group them together in what we like to call a cluster, like this one, that has 13 locations.
So you get where this is going. Jump forward a little bit more, and they're clustering things together.
Because they want to be isolated and do their evil deeds on their own. And also on an unlawful planet, such as somewhere in the Pyros system. For the targets, outlaw outposts, crash ships because they would shoot them down, and also ruins from just places they just completely overrun. The data on this one, you'd find specific loadouts, and they'll be using weapons that you wouldn't find in any other legal system. And these weapons will be sold at the shops in these regions. So,
yeah, who knows? Maybe we'll have roads in between these places, huh? Where we're going, we do need roads.
Just like our locations, we can put clusters near other clusters, and we group them together, ranging between 10 to 15 locations each. And we group this into what we call a sector. Like this one, that has about 120 locations. However,
I hope they can
on a planetary scale, we can define
I hope they can
how
prove
many
this out,
sectors
and
we
it
should have.
can be a good system. They do they talk a lot of amazing game, and like they show a lot of amazing tech. And I think if a company like Rockstar were to come out and show a presentation like this, people would lose their absolute f***ing minds for weeks. I think CIG just needs to like deliver. They need to have they have delivered on some really key things, and they get props for, well, they probably don't get the props that they should for that kind of stuff. I think server meshing has done really good job for the game, but a lot of these like deliveries, a lot of these things that they've talked about were like right at the time where they need to start proving themselves. And I hope that Starchitect comes out and does what they say, because this is crazy technology. But I think most people need to see it to believe it. So that's Starchitect. And just to give context of like where they are in terms of getting the narrative and tech designer talking about it. So it's probably starting to scale after getting some initial work last year. Still a ways away, I bet. They talk as if it is coming with Genesis this year, but I don't know, man. I don't know. We'll see. Let's keep an eye on the February monthly report for that kind of thing.